Okay, here we go, everyone. Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to this, our 7th virtual Angling Trust Sea Angling Forum. This is the 4th one that we've been running with an IFCA, and I'm delighted to welcome our speaker Tim Dapling from the Sussex IFCA to be with us this evening. Working in the background with me tonight are Nevin Hunter and Hannah Rudd. But before I hand over to Tim, I'd also like to just give a plug to the Angling Trust Sussex Marine region. This region works for all Sussex anglers and pushes the issues you think are important. In the past, this has included working with Tim on offshore netting issues and also promoting participation events down at Shoreham. We'll send you the details of this after this event on how you can get involved with the region, and we'll plug it again in the email we send out after the event. So moving on, can I just explain how the evening's going to work? Tim's going to give a presentation using PowerPoint. We're going to do this in 2 parts. After each part, there'll be an opportunity to pose questions, which Hannah Rudd will be able to read out from the questions that you have posed. So you can write any questions you have in the Q&A box on your screen, either while Tim is presenting or during the Q&A session itself. Once the Q&A session is over, after the 2 parts, I will then come back onto the screen in order to close the evening off for us all. And finally, we are recording this session this evening, and we will be posting it onto the Angling Trust website in the next few days. So anybody who misses tonight's session will get that opportunity to either view it again or to catch up with it at their leisure. So that's enough from me now. So I'd like to welcome Tim. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for that very kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to join you this evening and be able to present. Obviously, at the moment, I understand that you've worked from the southwest along from Cornwall, Devon and Southern IFCAs, and you're now with me this evening on this presentation. I think it's a great opportunity for us to come in on these forums and have the chance to present about what the organisations are doing. So I hope this will be informative for those that have joined this evening, and thank you again for showing an interest. So I will move on and move to the first slide. So the content this evening of the presentation, as Stuart said, will be in 2 parts. Part 1, I'm just going to briefly cover the authority's district constitution and a bit of an overview on our duties and organisational structure. A brief look at our vessels, our assets that we use for carrying out marine compliance and research. And then I'm going to focus on our core activities and planning. Three main areas that I intend to tell you a bit about is that associated with development of the actual fisheries management and conservation management, our research and evidence provision, and briefly on compliance management as well. Then I'll have a slide or two in respect to angling community engagement and opportunities for the future for sea angling off Sussex. So that will be the first element of the presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions, and hopefully I can provide some answers to you on those. And then once we're through that, then I'm going to have a part 2 element to the presentation and this evening, which is specifically going to focus on Black Bream Management in the Sussex IFCA district, and I think that is probably particularly interesting to many of the fishing community, the angling community in this area. We're very fortunate to have such a charismatic species that is present in our district. So that's the sequence of things. I'll move on. So this is a slide that has been shared before by others to briefly explain that Sussex IFCA is one of 10 IFCAs, statutory body, and it is essentially only around the English coast. IFCAs are only around England, and they essentially cover an area 6 nautical miles seaward, and also the landward boundaries include the upper tier local authorities through which they're funded. So in the case of Sussex IFCA, that's associated with East Sussex and West Sussex County Council and Brighton and Hove City Council. We do have an association of IFCAs, but that is a non-statutory body, and they represent all of the IFCAs on various matters at a national level. I thought it would briefly worth mentioning that the origins of the IFCA in terms of the law and when we began. The Marine and Coastal Access Act, which came in 2009, established the IFCAs, and Part 6 of that Act is specifically about the management of inshore fisheries. So the authorities were established actually in 2010, and following some sort of transitional legislation, powers moved from the old sea fisheries committees that used to manage inshore in 2011 and moved to the new IFCAs. Also, there was new core duties within the Marine and Coastal Access Act, and I've summarised those very briefly. Essentially, the 2 core duties associated are those of sustainable exploitation of sea fisheries resources and balancing the socio-economic needs between those interested parties, so that's both commercial and recreational needs. And also Section 154 also covers the protection of marine protected areas, and that includes the marine conservation zones and European marine sites, and I'll explain a bit more about them later on. So the authority membership structure, staffing and funding is the same and is similar in many respects to the other districts. Our district is relatively small compared with many of the others, or some of the others, the larger districts such as Northwestern and Eastern IFCA. But it could be, I'd say, characterised by quite a high species diversity actually within the district itself. And obviously we have a very high coastal population and high activity levels associated with both commercial and recreational activity. The membership of the IFCA, we have 21 members who sit on the authority, and they are comprised of 7 constituent council appointees from those authorities I briefly mentioned. 11 appointees made by the Marine Management Organisation, and 3 officers from both the MMO, the Environment Agency, and Natural England. Our team is relatively small. In fact, the membership of the authority significantly outweighs the number of staff employed in the IFCA, and we've got the equivalent about 12 full-time equivalent members of staff, and that comprises of individuals with marine biology background, ecologists, or people involved in experiencing compliance and marine operations. And our funding, just to quickly pick up on that, is, as I say, from the local authorities, with some additional support from DEFRA in terms of about 1/5 of our funding, and our budget is circa about 1 million per annum. Structure of the organisation, as I say, it's relatively small, and you can see in this structure here, we've basically got a senior management team that are overseen by the authority members, and then we've got some sector managers looking after research, conservation, and compliance and vessels, and officers below those. And we do employ quite regularly students and volunteers. Unfortunately, obviously, during the COVID period, that's been quite difficult, but hopefully as we move forward this coming year and onward, there'll be further opportunities for bringing individuals in. And if you're interested in that type of work, I'd be very happy if you contacted us. And obviously we have finance and administration functions as well within the organisation. So that's a quick overview of our structure there. The seaward jurisdiction, as I mentioned, I think it extends to 6 nautical miles. The magenta line here on the chart is shown at both 3 and 6 nautical miles, and the east and west boundaries, as you can see, the easternmost boundary is just east of Rye, and that is a line lying south from the county boundary between Kent and East Sussex. And to the west, our boundary essentially extends from the county boundary between Hampshire and West Sussex. And because of the nature of a bay closing line, the actual district extends some way offshore at that point, beyond 6 miles, as you can see from the chart. This is a bathymetric chart, just so you might be interested to note that obviously the darker areas represent the shallower areas, and there's a 10-metre contour on as the darkest line on the inside. So relatively shallow waters. In fact, I think probably the maximum depth within our district is around about 50 metres, which is relatively shallow, probably compared with some other districts on the southwest approaches. Just a quick mention, the landward extent, as I said, it goes into the local authorities' limits, and also it's worth mentioning the extent of our jurisdiction in tidal rivers. So that's the limit of the tidal extent of rivers, and also we have responsibility as well for all marine species that frequent or migrate into tidal waters. So for instance, mullet or bass, which are known to swim quite significant distances up rivers inland, are still our responsibility, despite the fact they're not actually in the coastal waters, but are migrating up these rivers. In terms of our vessels, to carry out our work at sea, obviously, like other IFCAs, it's important that we've got the suitable tools to do the job. And we rely on 2 main marine assets. The first, the upper vessel, is Fisheries patrol vessel Merlin. This is an 8-metre rib, obviously able to go into quite shallow areas. Interestingly, it's fitted with a jet drive, and that means that obviously there's no issues around props catching in shallow areas on either mud or anything else. The downside is that jet drives are very good at actually sucking in various bits and pieces, whether that be seaweed or an old plastic bag that's been left in the sea. So there are some disadvantages around them, but obviously there's ways of getting over that. The vessel's interesting asset. It was shared in terms of purchasing with the Environment Agency, and it is used also with them to monitor activities because of the Environment Agency's responsibility for managing migratory fish within our district. And we do have the rivers, most of the rivers do have migratory runs of sea trout. Salmon are much more unusual in the Sussex region. We're not in the same situation as the Solent, where some of the other rivers further to the west have salmon runs. We don't have significant salmon runs, but we do have quite a lot of sea trout, and obviously those are quite relatively active in inshore waters where they feed before they migrate up the rivers to spawn. The lower vessel is our main fisheries patrol vessel, Watchful, was built in around 2003, and this carries out our both compliance and a good deal of our research work as well. So obviously has the capacity to deploy and tow various bits and pieces in terms of cameras or acoustic gear. It also has the ability to recover pots and nets. It's got haulers on it, and that's quite important for our management activity, as you'll see a bit later on when I mention that in the compliance sector. On board the back of the vessel, it carries another rib, which is the boarding boat, which is just illustrated in the bottom right of the picture, which is a small 6-meter delta. So with a diesel drive in that. Okay, moving on. So looking at our core activities, first of all, management. And I think this is clearly the key, or the crux of what the IFCAs are doing locally in your area in terms of looking after the seas and managing the coastal fisheries. So that's the development of management. We're implementing at the moment a review of management objectives, and those are embedded within our planning cycles. So we have an annual plan and we have an annual report. There's a copy just illustrated in the picture below, and we build into our planning our priorities, and obviously through that we ensure that we're keeping to a schedule and a planned approach to delivery of our management. And the delivery of that management is primarily achieved through the creation and the implementation of bylaws. And those bylaws, because of the nature of the districts, will reflect local evidence needs, evidential needs, and the local needs of the community as well, in terms of both the commercial and recreational fishing community. We also use non-regulatory management methods. So we've got codes of conduct, which hope to provide improvements in the way in which activities take place, but at the same time aren't a regulatory approach. And obviously we hope to influence and inform, and hopefully by coming along this evening, in part, that's what I'm able to do. My apologies if this appears a little bit of a fussy slide with a lot of information on, but I did feel it was worth perhaps putting this in. We are working on multiple work streams at the same time in terms of our management, and we have management themes. The themes I've just identified and summarised in the left-hand column. So, for example, we might have trawling, shellfish, MCZ management, minimum sizes, netting. So these are the sort of themes we have, and then they will be focused around, they may be focused around specific types of species or activity. So we may be looking at certain types of towed gears, maybe scalloping or otter trawling or beam trawling, or we may be looking at net fisheries or pot fisheries associated with certain types of species. So that was just to give you a feel for the scope of what we're dealing with, and we have to prioritise those in different ways, and there's always lots of requests for different things to be prioritised externally, and obviously we have to make sure that we do that in a systematic and logical way. So I've just outlined on the left hand side of the slide that we first focus really on one of these are the drivers that make us prioritise what we do first and the order of things, and essentially that's the statutory requirements, the complexity and our ability to develop solutions, the stakeholder needs and perceptions, and that includes the angling community, the value of fisheries, how important they are in terms of economic or social value, the sustainability of the fisheries as they stand. Do they need further management? Is that something that we can offer further benefit to by through interventions? Is there going to be a lot of potential growth in a particular fishery? Are we seeing a demand for a certain type of species or within a fishery? And so we have to respond to that. Obviously, the available evidence and perhaps the social, and to some degree, the social and cultural significance of that fishery. On the right-hand side of the slide is just really to indicate to you where we are in our current planning cycle in terms of those things that have been completed and those things that we are still working on, and those areas of which we have not had an opportunity to do any work on at all. And as you can see, what we've actually got is a good deal of work completed in many areas, a great deal completed in terms of the marine protected areas management, and a good deal in other areas such as shellfish management as well. Interestingly, I think particularly for those that are listening today, we are currently working on minimum sizes, and actually we do have a new bylaw that is currently in the public consultation stage. So I think if you have any interest in the management of or use of minimum sizes and what you would like to see happen in the IFCA district, now is an ideal time to participate in that, and that consultation is open for a couple more weeks. Okay, I won't stay on this slide for any longer. I think I've covered that in more than enough detail. So I wanted to focus on a particular fisheries management objective and work stream that we have been working on for some time, and actually came to fruition quite recently. The bylaw was actually confirmed in March this year, and this was our nearshore trawling bylaw, which was originally made in 2019 by the authority, but it takes a good deal of time to go through both the consultation process post making the bylaw when it was dated, until the final processes of the bylaw being submitted to the Secretary of State and final confirmation by DEFRA. And at that point, the bylaw is actually becomes law, which it is now. So this happened quite recently. And the purpose of this bylaw is to prevent damage to and recover sensitive and essential marine habitats, to reduce bass and juvenile bream bycatch in trawlers, particularly pair trawlers, which target those species. It was also seen as an opportunity to promote the recovery of extensive kelp beds, and there's extensive partnership work being done around kelp and interest in kelp more widely in terms of habitat recovery. And off the Sussex coast, between basically west of Shoreham, there were extensive kelp beds historically, and there has been a very significant reduction in that kelp, and the intention is that the removal of trawling pressure will be able to enable that recovery. We expect to see increased wildlife abundance and productivity associated with this management, protecting juvenile and spawning fish and shellfish, which reside in a lot of these areas. And subsequently, these are benefits. The benefits that will be accrued from that will be both to the commercial and recreational communities for the future in terms of the state of those populations. This approach to fisheries is essentially referred to as an ecosystem approach to fisheries management, and I'm just including this slide because an ecosystem approach is not just about looking at a specific species, a single species, and saying, well, we're not going to catch more than X amount of that species. This is looking at an ecosystem and looking at habitats and a more holistic way of managing the marine environment and fisheries. The benefit of this is that ecosystem management offers not just benefits in fisheries. Ecosystems, healthy ecosystems actually offer many benefits, and they include both the fisheries resources, but there's other issues such as water quality, protection of the coastline from storm damage. So it's possible that kelp absorbs energy, wave energy, that is would normally cause coastal erosion. Particularly important at the moment is that kelp has a function in carbon sequestration, so it absorbs carbon, and ultimately when the kelp rots down into sediments, that carbon is basically trapped in those sediments for the future, and you know it actually makes a carbon sink. They're very important for nursery habitats, for commercial and non-commercial fish species, and all of this ecosystem approach has much wider benefits, not just directly for fishers, whether they're recreational or commercial, but also such as tourism and recreation. And there's many divers that dive off this area. So there's a little schematic on the right-hand side, which just shows the sort of how the ecosystem services provide different inputs and benefits. And there's a link at the bottom when this is, I'm not going to open it now, but there's a link at the bottom here, which basically gives you a video, which we've also got on our website, and tells you about what is happening. And this is about protection of that nearshore area. Fundamental to all this is actually understanding habitats, and we spend much time on this in terms of our research. This is one of the maps which, just for information, just illustrates here the change in habitat type as you move east to west, and the mosaics that exist. Now these are polygons, so they're take the best available information and provide an interpretation of that. So what you can broadly see here, which is quite interesting, and many of you will be aware of it, that the further east you go, basically there's more softer, smaller sediments, finer sediments, so there's more sand and mud to the east. In the west, you'll find more rock and harder sediments and the associated habitats with those. Of course, there are patches or areas that are different, and it's quite evident that the area off Eastbourne contains a mosaic of different habitats, as well as that to the west with harder features. So that type of information is absolutely critical when we come to develop our management, as we did with the nearshore trawling bylaw. And I'm just showing here, this is actually a copy of a page from the guidance document that is available on the nearshore trawling bylaw, including the inserted map, which in the red shows you the area in which trawling is now prohibited within the district. And as you can see, that's varying distances from the coast, depending on which part of the district you're in. But if we think back to the previous map, we can see the association now of the area that's further offshore with those habitats in that area. and that's the supporting evidence that justifies and enables us to bring forward this management. This is a particularly important piece of management for the future. It will be a long-term piece of management in terms of reaping the benefits and seeing the benefits, but there are already probably quite some short-term effects which you may become aware of quite soon. Moving on to MPA management, we have, and these are just some summary statistics, we've got 27 marine protected areas in the district, named marine protected areas within the district. And if you look on our webpage around marine protected areas, and there's a link at the top, it will provide you with a full list of those and information on them. And that covers an area of about 800 kilometres square, which is about 46% of our district. We have introduced now bylaw management for 5 of our 6 marine conservation zones which are in the district, and we have also introduced management within areas for European marine sites, which are represented by the areas in green on the map. And that management varies in all sorts of ways. Specifically, the European marine site management in Chichester Harbour is to protect the seagrass, the seagrass beds which are in there, and so we have a very careful protection around those. I'm going to talk in considerable detail about management within Kingmere MCZ later on when I talk about the Black Bream, so I will move on a bit now and from this slide. Another core activity we do is research and evidence provision, and I can't emphasise enough that that is focused on informing our management decisions within the authority's district. We have a 4-year and an annual research planning cycle, and we use the best available evidence we can. We've got equipment in-house and we develop our skills. However, obviously it's a small team. Very small team, as pointed out, so partnership working is absolutely essential, and that includes working with the recreational sea angling sector in the context of citizen science, and there's a really interesting bit of work we did on that, which I'm going to come to in due course. Some research highlights I thought you would be interested in seeing or understanding. Habitat mapping, I sort of picked that out already to some extent. There's a couple of links here that you will be able to use when the presentation is uploaded, and you'll be able to see, get an overview about the habitat mapping we do, how we do it. We are very focused, or we spend a lot of time making sure we record what types of fishing activity take place in certain areas, and therefore we can map the effort that's being applied in certain areas by different types of fishing activity, and that includes recreational as well, but it's also commercial. We do small fish surveys, and these essentially are carried out in the harbours and inlets and nearshore coastal areas. And I'm just going to come to it later, but I've just identified a highlight there was the Black Bream tagging. The small fish surveys are really interesting because they actually provide quite fundamental data and information about where early life stages of fish are, where important areas are. And very often, well, we know associated with, say, the harbours that we will find juvenile Black Bream and juvenile bass in the harbours, as well as many other species. I've just put this in there because I just feel it's a very interesting slide from a visual point of view, but this sort of describes what you can get from acoustic type information and interpretation, and what you can see at on a broader scale. This was actually a map produced by what was called the Regional Environmental Characterisation sort of project which was conducted quite a number of years ago as part of aggregate industry work. But it doesn't take much of an imagination to see that what you are looking at there is an ancient riverbed, and you can see the flow of the riverbed, the Paleo River, before essentially the English Channel, the sea levels rose and to what they are now. So this river was essentially there when, you know, there was a much more land present, and actually those areas in yellow would have been at one point areas of land which have now obviously been over many millennia have been overtopped by coastal waters. This is just a couple of images that we use from acoustic information, but this is how you take acoustic information and how you can then translate that into habitat information. The acoustic information is obtained from backscatter data obtained from surveys conducted to carry out bathymetric and hydrographic surveys along the coast. But those surveys, which are done for chart purposes, essentially provide a fantastic data source for us to be able to access and utilize and get interpreted for habitat work as well. And there's just some simple images there which sort of, but they show you the detail of the information, and you can actually see, you know, ledges of rocks, and with the right ground truthing tested through video work, you can then effectively produce some quite detailed maps. I've actually got here, now this is a map showing across the district, showing habitat type, and if this successfully works, you can go on our interactive habitat map and you can click on one of these spots, and this, with a bit of luck, will happen, and it will open. I'm hoping you can see this now. We'll open a YouTube video for you to see. You're able to go and access that at your leisure. Fishing effort data. I'm moving on to. Oh. My apologies, I will have to deal with that. Had a feeling there might be a technical issue when I tried to open that for you, but forgive me. Let's try and get back to where we were. Links are always a bit risky. Anyway, hopefully you did see that. Fishing effort point data. This is the activity data. Here you can see point data being used in conjunction with the boundary for the nearshore trawling bylaw. So the nearshore trawling bylaw boundary is in the red line along the coast, and you can see there we by using this information understand the extent of the management intervention that will take place, and in this case the sightings of trawlers that have occurred over a very long period within that area, which obviously won't be able to fish in there now. We also use this type of information and turn it into intensity maps, such as this for netting effort and this for potting effort. As you can see how different types of activity occur at different densities in different areas. So Chelsea is a particularly important area for potting, and there's a lot of good ground in there for lobster and crab, which is reflected in those activity maps. So this is another piece of work we spend much time on. Going on to our small fish surveys, these are just some examples of some of the fish that caught in some of the images, and you can see the relative abundance graph below and the extent of different species that are identified in some of our sampling in different areas. Key area which really a particular interesting area that we did sampling in was Medmary as the realignment, and the Medmary Harbour, the area regained and its natural sort of status, or obtained a natural status as a natural harbour. It was fascinating to see how quickly that was colonised essentially by the fish and crustacea and shellfish communities, and that was reflected in our small fish surveys, the number of species, and quite rapidly we were seeing the same sort of species represented there that we were seeing in an established harbour like Chichester Harbour. Here we have some comparisons. Say Medmary on the left here, the number of species, and in the spring and autumn, these were done at 2 different sampling times a year, and you can see there that obviously Rye and Chichester were particularly important in terms of species diversity that were found in nets. So there was different types of methodologies used. There were seine nets, fyke nets, were also set in certain places, and we had a massive help in terms of stakeholders that were interested in doing that. And I'm delighted that I know that the Angling Trust and some of the local members of the angling community have been enormously helpful and interested and carried out some great work in terms of citizen science on that. And I will use the opportunity to thank Reg at this moment, because I know he has done a good deal of work in that area, and they did some really helpful work over around Newhaven in particular. I did want to touch on compliance and enforcement activity, clearly one of our key bits of work. Compliance management, we operate on a risk-based approach, and we consider that in both in the context, our risk-based management is developed in the context of the threat to a stock, a threat to juveniles in terms of bycatch or mortality through the types of gears, and the potential risk to the environment. So we look at those factors in the context of where we prioritise our activities. Clearly, we are a regulatory body. We have the ability to issue sanctions, and in the worst situations where obviously we hope that it doesn't reach this point, but obviously we are able to prosecute for certain serious offences. We do issue warnings, and we issue financial administrative penalties. And there's some figures there basically over the last few years. Obviously, the last year has been somewhat unusual, but I should add that I'm very pleased to say that our patrol vessel was operating at sea over the last year, and we, as best could, maintain our level of activity. There's one of the inset photographs is interesting. We do a lot of work on shellfish management, and as I say, we do haul gear, we inspect gear, and in some instances we seize gear, and we do remove gear, lost gear or abandoned gear to remove it from the fishery, because obviously we don't want ghost fishing taking place, which is a potential issue, and we have recovered gear in which we found ghost fishing has been taking place sometimes. So that is a piece of our work that we do as well. We work closely with other authorities, with the Marine Management Organisation, the Environment Agency, the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, and of course the police. So community, angling community engagement and opportunities. I just wanted to finish the first part of my talk on this. So what are we trying to achieve for the community, and what are those opportunities? So we want to provide better angling. Essentially, we want to protect the fisheries, we want to protect the stocks, and ensure there's healthy stocks, and in so doing we will ensure that there will be good quality angling for the future, and more opportunities to angle, I suppose, maintain opportunities and access as well. We need to provide access to information, which we do obviously through our website and physical information that we distribute to anglers. And we have educational material. As you can see, this child is just dealing with one of our interactive boards at an event that we had that was actually taken a good while ago. It was one of the Bexhill angling events, and obviously we do try to attend those types of events and have a presence as well. On a national level, we're supporting the national angling strategy, both from this IFCA and through the association. And we do, I'm very keen to support the local angling forums, and obviously I'll work closely with the Angling Trust at a national level, and I have meetings with them on a regular basis, both with the local and the national members. We have a Sussex Regional Sea Angling Partnership Group, and that is what has, unfortunately it hasn't been recently, but it used to be hosted by us and meeting at our office, but that isn't the case at the moment due to where we are, but we hope that will soon be back to normal arrangements, and obviously our office will always be there for those meetings. We involve ourselves in national management that influences angling issues as well with DEFRA. I'm going to finish on this last slide for this part one. It's the opportunities for the future for sea angling in Sussex and inshore waters. I think the opportunity through the nearshore trawling bylaw will be the further protection of essential fish habitats, the Black Bream spawning sites as well. Many of those are inside the nearshore trawling zone, and we can expect, and I think anglers expect to see improvements in fish populations and associated inshore commercial and recreational fisheries through restrictions on trawling in nearshore areas and increases in the minimum cod size end on pair trawlers. We expect the bass bycatch to significantly decline, and that should enhance the bass fisheries as well. Netting management, we have been working hard on that, and we have a bylaw which is subject to confirmation from DEFRA, and pending changes to our netting management, we will be protecting those areas nearest the shore, including natural harbours and rivers, all year round. So there's we're just waiting on that management to be brought in and signed off by DEFRA. As I said, we're bringing in a minimum size bylaw at the moment, and I'd encourage you to participate in that. I think we have our catch and release is a really interesting opportunity, and something I'm always keen to discuss with the angling community. We already have a bag limit at Kingmere Marine Conservation Zone, and I see further opportunities for catch and release management. Codes of conduct, we will work closely with the Angling Trust on those, and we're actually working on an elasma brank fisheries code of conduct at the moment, and that's something we hope to bring forward. Management of bait collection is something which is being developed, and that is a work stream which will work towards a management bylaw in probably the next, probably in Q4 or Q1 next year. I think citizen science, as we will see in a bit later on, is going to be a key developing area, and the Sussex angling community has proven how excellent they are at being involved in that and collaborating, and I'll show that in further detail later. New species, I think everybody is well aware of the significant presence of or the growing presence of bluefin tuna, and we have increasingly seeing the presence of gilthead bream. as well in our area. Obviously, we have very healthy populations. We have good populations of black bream, but we are seeing more gilthead bream, and we have seen juveniles as well in some of our small fish surveys. So I think that's an interesting development. And nationally, I think the fisheries management plans are going to be a really important development for the recreational sector in future. And there's real potential if the national plans reflect the needs on some of the non-quota species that are of particular interest to the recreational sector, that they will those fisheries will be subject to further improvements. So I will leave you at the moment at this point with this picture of this happy angler with a very fine black bream, and just the image there and our vision stated. And I would emphasize that that vision, entirely from my perspective, is when it says industry, I regard that as clearly both the commercial and recreational fishing industry. I think we want sustainable fisheries for all parties, and thank you for spending the time to listen to that.
Thank you very much, Tim, for the first half of your presentation. So before we go on to discuss Black Bream, we've had quite a few questions come through, so we'll try to get through those in the next 10 minutes or so. Just to reiterate to the audience, if we don't get a chance to answer your question today, we will send those through to Tim and get back to you when we can. Does that sound okay with you, Tim? Just putting you on the spot there.
I'll do my best to do that. Yes, of course. Okay,
great. So to kick off, we have a question from Francis, and he's asked, what is the progress on Beachy Head East Marine Conservation Zone?
That's a very good question. So Beachy Head East MCZ was designated as one of the last MCZs to be designated in our district. It was done in tranche 3. So we have just in the process of receiving the formal conservation advice from Natural England on that. When we have got the formal conservation advice, we then are in a position to start to move towards basically dialogue with the community more widely, not just the commercial fishing community, but the angling community as well, and the wider community within Sussex about the management of that area. So it is very much, it is in our work plan for the future. I think that it's really looking at where we are now. I think there is background work going on right now, and I think it will start to really come into the public domain at the back end of 2001, the beginning of 2002, I think, in terms of discussions. I mean, we know there's some good work being done in sort of groundwork being done in conversations with the community around it, and I know a lot of people are really interested in it, and it is a large MCZ, it's a very large MCZ, and it will cover you know, a significant amount of important habitats. So yeah, good question, thank you.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Tim McPherson in relation to the nearshore trawling bylaw that's recently been introduced. How long do we think the recovery of the kelp beds will take, and what are you doing to enforce the bylaw?
Yeah, well, I know Tim well, and that's a very nice question. So I think that obviously we hope that the kelp recovery will be as soon as possible, but we've got surveys. There is some kelp in certain areas, but generally speaking, there's a distinct lack of kelp compared with, or absence of kelp, when you compare it with some of the historic surveys that were carried out some sort of 20 or more years ago. I think there is going to be discussions about what can be done, perhaps in terms of enhancement, and there are partners talking about ways of doing that in terms of perhaps whether there's opportunities for seeding kelp in certain areas or that type of thing. I think left to its natural courses, it may well take a good number of years to recover to anything like its former self. So I think if there are opportunities to accelerate that, then we will be looking at those, and I'm sure many partners who are interested in it will be. But I'm afraid it is very difficult to put an exact time on it. I think we are talking a good number, probably many years before we see a very significant change. But we have seen, we have got reports of things happening which people are quite surprised by, and there are clearly evidence of kelp in certain areas. So hopefully that will act as sort of a seed kelp to help colonise other parts of the area. In terms of compliance, I mean, obviously I've shown that we are active out on the sea. We are very conscious that you know, of the importance of this area, and in actual fact the vessels in question that we would need to monitor are probably normally carry vessel monitoring systems, so we can also see them from a tracking point of view if necessary through that. I can assure him that we will be very keenly watching any issues around compliance.
That's great, thank you. So we've had a question through from Reg Phillips, and before I go on to the question, Reg also wants to extend his thanks to you and your team for the introduction of the nearshore trawling bylaw, and the work of your team for engaging sea anglers and charter skippers who fish within Kingmere Marine Conservation Zone, and the management plan that's been delivered. So moving on to the question, Reg says, we keep hearing the IFCA state their remit to balance the needs. Can you explain how a netting proposal to allow nets to be set in 2 metres of water at any state of the tide throughout the Sussex district is balancing the needs of our recreational shore anglers and clubs?
Yeah, okay, so we're at the moment at a position where we've got a netting permit bylaw that is with DEFRA at the moment, and we are seeking confirmation on that bylaw. That bylaw brings in a large number of management measures for netters, for netting activity within the district. That includes all-round prohibition on netting from the shore all year round throughout the district. We also, there will in effect be, because of the depth of a net plus the depth that will be required to be present over the headline of that net, there will always be a distance that any net will have to be in effect worked from the shore to be compliant, and that we feel and the authority considers was appropriate in terms of balancing the needs of both various groups within the fishing community. It is an extremely complex and it's a very difficult compromise in terms of positions with netting, because people have in some instances, some very polarized positions on it, and we appreciate that the solution that we have may not be what everybody would have hoped, but I think in my view, when you look at the detail of what we have got in there, it offers huge benefits in terms of improving netting management within the district, whilst and creating some space, if you like, for fish and shellfish to be unaffected by nets, whilst at the same time not overly adversely affecting some of the commercial interests, which do rely on some netting that is relatively close to the shore at certain times of year.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Peter, and he asks, is the minimum size limit development local to the Sussex region, or is it a national initiative? And I'd just like to add to that as well. Do you think that if it was a national initiative for minimum conservation reference sizes, that it would lead to more robust management and better conservation, achieving conservation goals more effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think in an ideal world we would probably have national legislation with a comprehensive minimum sizes for a whole range of species that better reflected their size at which they mature. That simply isn't the case, and at the moment it doesn't appear there's any likelihood of that developing in the immediate future. I think that it therefore is basically the IFCAs have taken on the responsibility of introducing minimum sizes where they can. I mean, Sussex, we are now will closely align us with the intention, is to closely align us with southern IFCA's intended minimum sizes, which I think is good. We'll have good parity there, providing that they move forward as we hope. Yes, I mean, sometimes achieving things at a national level it is the ideal solution, but it's not possible simply because of political or priorities within those organisations that can implement that. And I suppose this is where the opportunity exists for the IFCAs who are perhaps able to act more swiftly, can bring in local sizes. But of course, we are talking carefully to one another about what we are doing, and in many instances, typically referring to the same evidential information in respect to, for instance, the appropriate sizes that would be used.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, just in the interest of time, we'll go to the last question before carrying on with the presentation. So this is a simplified question from Malcolm, because he's provided quite a lot of information that I'll then pass on to you, which I'm sure you'll want to further comment on at a point in the future. And he asks, do you believe that the compilation of the Sussex IFCA committee reflects the value of recreational sea angling within the sector? And does the IFCA generally appreciate its largest constituency by number of participants and contributory value is recreational sea angling?
I mean, the appointment of members to the authority is made by the Marine Management Organisation, and the appointments process is done in such a way that it seeks to provide, I think, a balance in terms of constitution and membership of people with expertise and experience from various sectors. I've always felt that our authority has had individuals that have a good understanding of recreational fisheries and have been able to contribute very well in those discussions. And I think in terms of the balance, I don't feel that we are out of balance. It is often the case that the commercial fishing industry are concerned that there isn't enough individuals with expertise from their sector on the authorities. And as I say, it isn't because we don't actually make the appointments. That is something beyond the control of the officers themselves within the authority. But I think the balance is in Sussex quite reasonable. And I think when opportunities come up for people to apply to be on the authority, I think if people are interested, they should apply. They do come up, the opportunities do arrive, and in actual fact, you know, generally when they do come, there isn't as much interest as I would have necessarily anticipated in wanting to participate. And I do appreciate, for many, it's a, you know, it's a significant commitment, and it's an unpaid commitment. So you know, a lot of people, you know, perhaps they think it would be a good idea, and then they can consider it a bit more and decide that they won't apply. But we would welcome people from the angling sector, of course. And it's important that I think people, there's often individuals who, for instance, may have an understanding of angling, but are not necessarily sort of coming from that perspective. I mean, we've had local authority councillor members who essentially are anglers or have a knowledge of commercial fishing as well. So, and they're not necessarily, the appointments aren't there to specifically represent sectors. They're there for individuals, of course, to have who come with a knowledge of those issues. But I'm sure people will always have a view about the Constitution and whether it is as balanced as they would like it to be, or it is in a way that they would like it to be. Thanks, Hannah.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. Yes, just to everyone in the audience, please do keep your questions coming through, and we'll try and answer them after the next section of the presentation. If not, I will send those through to Tim to answer in the future. Right, over to you, Tim. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm moving on now to the management of Black Bream in the Sussex district. And obviously the best thing to start was with a picture of one of these very charismatic fish on the front. It's probably not as quite as good a picture as I should have found, but you give an indication of how good they are. Obviously, when they're in full colour, the males with the blue on their heads, and you catch them in the light, they are quite spectacular. Obviously a very prized sport fish. They fight very well. And you know, they're caught on relatively light gear, and we in Sussex appear, or we have perhaps one of the most famous locations for fishing for this species of fish. They do grow to quite significant sizes as well. I mean, it's not unusual to hear of ones that are sort of 5-6 pounds and or 3 kilos. And that obviously is quite a powerful fish on light gear. So if you haven't fished for them and you're watching this, I would strongly recommend that you have a go. And there's probably, you know, the charter operators that are available at the moment. This would be an ideal chance right now to catch them if you can get a booking. Anyway, moving on to what we do in terms of management, I basically just summarise this as follows. We've got the fisheries management on Kingmere Marine Conservation Zone, and I'm going to get on to the conservation zone and the designation and the reason for its designation shortly. But we have in that detailed zonal management of the site, including a total exclusion for fishing in certain areas and bream bag limits. So this is going to be you know, one of the key elements I'm going to explain in terms of our management work on bream. But we also now, through the nearshore trawling bylaw, offer a wider protection of spawning areas and nearshore habitats supporting juveniles. And I do think this is going to make a quite significant difference in future in terms of the angling opportunities for many within the district, and some of the commercial fishing opportunities for those who may be targeting bream through methods other than trawling. We have introduced a increased minimum mesh size in pair trawls for petrels when fishing for bream. So this, if there are areas where pair trawling does continue for bream, then which there may well be, then this should reduce the bycatch of smaller animals, and that new size generally seeks to align with the introduction of a new minimum size, which is proposed at 23 centimetres. So that is in our current consultation. On the research front, we have done some really interesting tagging work with the angling community, and I should have said before now, and Reg Phillips was mentioned and talked about our work, and I have to just say and offer sincere thanks to Reg for all that he has done in terms of working with the IFCAs over the many years that I've known Reg, and our tagging work, I think, was really just really sort of emphasises the strength of the relationship with some of the recreational fishing community, and that we were able to put that in place and find out some key information about fish maturity. Sorry, the fidelity of mature fish. So we're also exploring the possibility around the possible future options for catch and release in designated areas. We have our bag limit at the moment. The Kingmere MCZ management will have to be reviewed at a certain point in time, and I think that that may be a suitable opportunity to talk more about and discuss the opportunities for catch and release as a management measure. We're monitoring commercial and recreational fishing activities, as I identified, and the catches, and we are promoting management activities of black bream with local partners, obviously, importantly including the recreational sea angling sector. We're supporting and conducting small fish surveys to understand the distribution of early year classes of black bream as well. And I think, as I sort of touched on earlier on, we're seeing those turning up in regularly in locations such as Chichester Harbour and Medmary, and they are the most amazing small versions. They are actually proportionally very much alike to a full size or a mature fish, and yeah, that's wonderful when you see early year classes caught and what's coming through for the future. So Beachy Head, Kingmere Marine Conservation Zone. There's a little infographic here which summarises some of it, and I'm going to show you a map in a minute of it. But obviously, it was designated in 2013. It covers about 47 square kilometres of seabed, and within that area, there's a huge diversity of fish species and other marine life associated with the habitats that are there. Importantly, one of the key reasons it was designated as a marine conservation zone is the presence of a protected feature, which is the black bream, the black sea bream spawning area within the site. It's also protected because of the moderate energy rock and thin mixed sediments in there, and some of the subtidal chalk which exists in the site. It's a bit of a mecca for both anglers and commercial fishers. Fish on it as well, and it holds holds considerable amounts of shellfish, and it just has a very high biodiversity across the entirety of the site. This is the location of the site in terms of basically you can see the River Arun coming in. Obviously, Littlehampton is just essentially immediately to the north of the westernmost part of the site. This map just basically shows you a bit of the habitat and the infralittoral rock and thin mixed sediments and the distribution of those. It also, the black outline is essentially the key part of the reef and associated with the reef, and the yellow represents areas where black bream nests have been previously monitored, and the green area is associated with subtidal chalk. These are some nice images of what the reef looks like. As you can see, it's smothered with life, and not just important for black bream, and provides a habitat for numerous species. Interestingly, these are some shots of this incredible behaviour that the black bream has in terms of building a nest. So the male excavates a nest. There's one on the top left where the cobbles have been basically removed, and an area about a couple of meters across has been cleared, and then onto that hard surface the female will lay her eggs, and obviously the male will fertilize them, and then they protect the eggs, as you can see in slide, or in the image of slide 4, with a black bream that is having a bit of a set to with a wrasse that has decided to come too near her eggs. So the you can also see the in slide 2 the spawning behaviour with both the male and the female. These are some lovely shots that were collected on black bream spawning site some years ago. It's difficult to make out in slide 3, but there are actually, those are sort of the eggs attached to the surface of the rock. And what is amazing with these nests is that you can actually see them with a suitable acoustic equipment. They look like essentially a moon landscape covered in craters, which are the areas which the black bream have been diligently excavating the sediment and the gravel away, and they provide these sort of dimpled effect, and it is actually possible to subsequently count the number of nests over set areas if you've got the right imagery. So this is acoustic imagery being used to look at the density of nests here, or can be used for this. So quite remarkable that you can do that with this species. Obviously, it does depend on whether it creates a dimple if it has the right sediment to move away. If it was just laying its eggs on a hard surface, then you may not actually be aware that the nest is there in the same way. So this is the area, and we've divided it up into 4 zones as shown. They look, you might wonder why those zones are the way they are, but actually if you think back, and I'll take you back to this slide, there is some logic. So zone 3 is the area in which there wasn't any habitat, protected habitat, and then we have different management in place within those zones, and this is summarized in this little table here. Certain activities, zone 1 is a highly protected area, and during the breeding season for bream, the spawning season, no activity is permitted to take place in that zone at all. That includes any fishing gears, because of potential risks and damage to the site. Zone 2 has a fairly restricted closure arrangement. However, we do allow a permitted amount of angling based on a 4-fish bag limit per person. And as you can see, the other zones have different types of management in place, but according to the time of year and the level of protection we want to have in place. But it is quite complex, but I feel, and I hope the angling community feel it as well, that it is working, and compliance and understanding of it has been good, and I think, you know, this shows you we spent a lot of time developing this, working with colleagues, and we used quite a complex, or we used a long and detailed consultation process, informal consultation process called the community voice method, having meetings and dialogue and getting perspectives. And essentially, we tried to enable both a degree of commercial and recreational activity to take place within the area without adversely affecting the conservation features. Now, the other thing we've been up to in our studies and our work on bream was tagging studies. And I just wanted to touch on this. I'm just conscious of time and want to allow enough time for any further questions at the end. But these were tagging studies that took place during 2014 and 2015. And these were specifically relevant to development of the management we put in place within the marine conservation zone. So what we did was we basically did two types of tagging work on bream, and not on our own. We had assistance in all instances, and what we were trying to do was to find out the temporal and spatial spawning site fidelity exhibited by bream. Were they coming back? Are these bream coming back to the same places to spawn the same way? How much are they like? There's a lot of, in ecological terms, fish are often compared with birds in migration. They migrate to certain areas to breed, they migrate to certain areas to feed. And this is exactly what we see with bream. We see them coming in the spring. They normally turn up in about April. They then spawn on the sites. They sort of essentially hang around for a bit over the summer, and then they tend to move off into deeper water, and then they congregate offshore in the winter, the larger ones. The juveniles, in the meantime, the eggs have hatched. They basically move inshore, and then we find the juveniles growing in our harbours and our nearshore areas along the Sussex coast. So we were interested in what these bream got up to after they spawned, where they went to, and did they come back? And this in turn would help us understand about the impact of fisheries. We were also interested in the survivability of bream post catch and release. What happens if you catch one and you put it back? Do they all die, or is survival relatively good? We wanted to help understand that a bit better. And we wanted to understand efficacy of tagging techniques on bream. So first of all, we did this work closely with CFAS. This was quite complex. This was using what's called a VEMCO, that's the manufacturer tag, which is an acoustic tag, which is surgically inserted inside the bream. Now, we only did this with a very low number of fish, 5 fish, which were essentially tagged and then subsequently released. And in the bottom right hand corner, you see a chap with a bit of electrical kit, and he has a hydrophone which basically sticks over the side of the boat, and he listens for a particular signal to come from the tag. The tag is in the middle, in the middle bottom photograph is the black thing. It looks about, probably it's about 1/3 the length of the average sort of about 1/4 of the length perhaps of the average ballpoint pen, something like that, and that sort of thickness. And the bottom left hand picture, you can see where the tag is inserted in cross section is the blue circle at the bottom of the, essentially in below within the gut. So it was surgically opened up, inserted, and then stitched up, and the fish returned. And essentially what happened was that the fish, we then monitored to see if the fish stayed in the area, and what happened. These were where, this is Kingmere MCZ again, the map, and you can see where the fish were both released and then where they were picked up again in terms of on the acoustics, and they basically stayed pretty close to the area initially, and then this is it was a very labour intensive activity, so we could only do a limited amount of monitoring from the rib. But interestingly, what we also did is these tags were programmable, and we got the tags to basically work for a month then switch off, and then come back on a year later. And then a year later, we went back out and essentially did an acoustic survey then and listened again. And remarkably, when we came back, a fish was detected, or a tag was detected. Now, you could argue that it may not be a tag within a fish. We can't guarantee that. But nonetheless, it was interesting that we did pick up a tag a year later. Whether that was a returning fish or whether, unfortunately, it was just the remains of a fish or a tag at the bottom of the seabed is unknown, of course, to us. But interestingly, that position, although we picked up on one day, we didn't pick it up on another day. So perhaps it was in a fish and it had come back to exactly or very close to where it had been originally released. The Floy tagging, now this is the external tagging. There's some picture of some tags here. There's a tagged fish in the bottom right. And we did a lot of work here with anglers operating out of and the charter operators out of Littlehampton. And in actual fact, over a 2-year period, there were almost 2,000 bream, not beam, bream, were tagged during that period. And obviously then we were seeking reports for those from commercial and recreational fishers, which we did then get back over 2014 and 16, including lat longs in some instances. Obviously that was what we were particularly keen on. Where were they recaught? Approximately 2.6 recapture and reporting rate, a recapture and reporting rate we got, which was pretty good. I felt. I mean, you know, I mean, it obviously the bream may never get caught, or the tag may come out. There could be all sorts of things, but anyway, that was the level of reporting. And what we did find is that there was generally a very high fidelity to the site. And here you can see that where fish were released by anglers. So we trained up the charter skipper operators in terms of how to tag. We provided all the tags and the equipment, and they kindly, many of their crew or their customers willingly handed over the bream they caught, which were then subsequently tagged and recorded and returned to the sea. And this just illustrates the of where these bream get to. So as you can see, a number of them turned up on the French coast, it was good that we actually had reports from overseas. We were getting reports from France of captures, and that was really encouraging. The tag, just for information, obviously had a telephone number and an email address on it. So we did provide an incentive with a prize for a raffle a draw for those people that did return their tags. So thank you very much to them. And it was both the commercial and the recreational industry that did that and returned them. So what was the outcome of that? Well, we did find it was possible to acoustically tag a mature black sea bream. It was concluded that probably an array of fixed hydrophones on a larger scale would be necessary to determine the movements within an MCZ with certainty. So basically, you'd be sort of watching them all the time. One of the problems with a hydrophone that we had is that basically, if there was a reef in the way or whatever, that could possibly block the signal. And so there was some sort of the efficacy of it was far from 100% in being sure that you could find the tag or find the fish. The Floy tags, we had returns that were caught very closely to where the fish were released, and we actually, as hoped, expected, or as had anticipated, perhaps, there was clearly a strong fidelity by some fish to come back to a certain place, very close to that place, in fact, the following year. And another thing was that obviously the recaptures of tag fish illustrated that there was a degree of survivability, quite clearly, in the fact that these fish were being tagged and then caught again. They'd effectively lived quite effectively after they'd been caught and unhooked and returned. But I mean, we can't say any precise information on mortality, because obviously there is or fishing mortality, because there is quite a number of unknowns. But nonetheless, it was interesting that we had that information. What I think it really demonstrated more than anything else was the willingness of the fishing community and the recreational community to participate and be involved in this type of this work, and contributing to collecting information and playing a really significant part in supporting both the fisheries management of fisheries and the marine conservation management of the site. So, I mean, I think that was it went extremely well, and I can't express enough my thanks to all those that were involved in that. And as I move to the last slide, I hope this works, but this was a film of somebody took of an bit of underwater imagery recently, and a shoal of Black Bream off Sussex. They were extremely positive about the number of bream they saw. And they felt that it was more than they'd seen for a very, very long time in this area. And I think probably a nice image to finish on. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. We've had a few more questions. I'm conscious of time. Are you available to go on for sort of 10 more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, it's my fault. I ran on a bit there, but I am happy to answer anything.
Okay, great. So we'll do some Q&As for around 10 more minutes, and then anything that's left over we'll forward on to you, just so everyone in the audience is aware. So the first question is from Francis, and it's predominantly been covered, sorry, by your latter half of your presentation. But are there any more projects like the tagging of Black Bream in the pipeline, principally working with recreational anglers in the area?
I certainly hope so. We would like to get, I mean, obviously the last year has been, you know, a bit challenging from a point of view of research and you know, doing things with partners, but you know, I will be very keen to ensure that those types of work are developed for the future. And I know we've got a very enthusiastic member of staff who's coordinating the research at the moment, who will be keen to try and do that. So I think small fish surveys, I think tagging opportunities are there. We are in actual fact working on another project, a much bigger project. We're about the installation of an array of hydrophones across the district, which is intended to monitor fish that are coming in that have been fitted with tags in other areas. But it's a much bigger project, but locally, absolutely, we want to do things, and look forward to speaking to Francis.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Nevin, and he says, Southern IFCA have reported today on Twitter that sturgeon have started to turn up along our coastline. Comment online has suggested this is due to reintroductions taking place along French rivers and their coastline. Have you seen any sturgeon turning up within your district, and do you think reintroductions of any fish species are a positive step for us as well?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything locally here recently, but I think it is. I know there's quite a program to reintroduce sturgeon into some of the mainland continental rivers in France, so it's very likely we will see them turning up at some point. And obviously they will potentially migrate and move into some of our own rivers. I think the introduction of species, I think things are, I mean, in terms of the sort of preferred option, I think obviously when things are getting to the point that you are reintroducing them, it has got very, very bad at that point, because the levels are so depleted that you're having to enhance it, or you're having to reintroduce it. I mean, I think obviously the way is to, is to ensure that species don't reach those critical levels, and that is through trying to ensure that the habitats are protected and there's management in place to prevent that from happening. However, locally in our area, I mean, I'm just reflecting on the fact that I've seen, and there will be, I'm sure, people who are listening and participating that will be aware that in the late 60s it was possible to catch common skate off Sussex. Now they have been absent in this area for 50 years now, and whether that would it be ever a species that would be a candidate for reintroduction, and an active strategy to do it, I would think perhaps that would maybe be a species that might be a candidate, but obviously it's a complex sort of task, and actually even you need to be able to produce the offspring in the first place. I think sturgeon are maybe more straightforward, but some of the marine species are particularly difficult to breed for reintroduction needs. So we will focus on the habitats and ensuring what we have got in the area can develop well in terms of their population structures.
Great, thank you. So thank you for, so Kim says, thank you for answering the question about close inshore netting, but could you confirm if there is a minimum distance from the shore for this to take place?
Well, there's not the minimum. The distance from the shore is dependent on the bathymetry, or the depth of water along that bit of shoreline. So it's not we are not having a management system in place where we have a fixed distance from mean high water mark or from any other reference point. We are having a requirement that whenever a net is set, when it is in the water, there is always a requirement that there is a fixed amount of distance over the headline. And that means in effect that there will always need to be a certain depth of water at any location when the net is in the water, and that will mean that it will be a certain distance from the shore. So, well, that mean it'll be its distance from the shore will vary according to the gradient of the beach or the shoreline at that point. So if it's a very shallow gradient, then they would be further offshore. If it was a much steeper gradient, the net could be closer to the shore.
Great, thank you. So I think the last question, we're coming up for the end of the evening now. Mark has asked, do you think we'll ever get back to the stock levels from 15 to 20 years ago or beyond?
Yeah, I think that I think there is a lot of positive things that could be or indicators and things that we can hope will happen. I think that the most challenging thing from our point as an IFCA is we can only operate within the boundary of our district, which extends 6 miles, and obviously many fish species are migrating over long distances. They're moving offshore. They're subject to pressures that well beyond our control, and obviously we do what we can within the district in terms of management of stock, but I think for many species we are only able to manage for a period of a particular time period within the life cycle, or rather the movement of a fish during its sort of spawning, feeding, and migrations. So I'm sort of cautiously, hopefully optimistic for the future in terms of opportunities, and I think I think it's important the angling community keep on engaging where they can to try and encourage management to be improved and stocks to you know, and opportunities for fishing to be better for the future.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. And thank you for taking the time this evening to speak with us and answer any questions. I will forward any existing questions that remain onto yourself to answer at a later date. But thank you to the audience for taking the time to send those through as well. I will pass over now to Stuart Singleton-White for some final comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for an absolutely excellent presentation. A really interesting evening, and thank you everybody for the questions that we've had, which have really stimulated, I think, the presentation and the discussion this evening. And as Hannah has said, any that we didn't get around to asking, we'll make sure we forward to Tim, and hopefully Tim can provide some answers that we will publish on our website. So as we mentioned at the beginning, this presentation has been filmed this evening, and we will be uploading it to the C pages under the heading Virtual Sea Forums on our website in the coming week. Feedback obviously from these forums is really important to us to help us improve the event, make it more relevant, for us to be able to get an example or some ideas of what it is you would like to discuss at these future forums. So Nevin will be sending you all out an online survey, so keep an eye on your email inboxes for that. And if you could complete that, it only takes literally a couple of minutes to do. If you could complete that in the next week, that would really help us on improving these events in the future. And on the subject of events in the future, for those of you who are interested in continuing discussions around IFCAs, our next online forum is on Thursday, the 24th of June, and there we will be inviting Will Wright from the Kent and Essex IFCA to come and talk to us about the work that they do in Kent and Essex, which, as Tim says at the very beginning, you know, we started down in Cornwall in the southwest, we're working our way along the south coast, and now we're about to turn and head up the east coast towards the northeast. So do please come and join us then. And if you're not already signed up to our monthly sea angling newsletter, our online or our email newsletter, then please do sign up. It's a fantastic newsletter. We'd love your feedback on that, and it's a great way of keeping in touch with what we're doing at the Angling Trust, and one of our many passionate volunteers who work with us at the Angling Trust are up to in supporting recreational sea angling and making sure our voices are heard, not only with work we do with Tim and the other IFCAs, but also, you know, at the government level, you know, and with the MMO and with CFAS and with the many other organisations involved in fishing. So thank you very much for attending. I hope I haven't kept too many of you from the football this evening, and see you all again sometime soon. Thanks. Bye.